I sat there, the tea still warm between my palms, as my son's laughter echoed through the room. "Don't waste money on yourself, Mom. You've little time left." The words hung in the air, light to him, lead to me. Across the table, his wife smiled into her cup, and no one looked my way. The house I built, the roof I paid for, the life I held together. And somehow I'd become a countdown. He thought he was saving me from waste. He never imagined I'd start with him. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun poured through the wide windows of Michelle's family room, casting a golden blur across Lydia's hands as she wrapped them tighter around her teacup. The steam curled upward, invisible almost, like the part of her that was learning to vanish inside this family, polite, present, but never truly welcome. Across from her on the worn leather sectional, Todd leaned back, one ankle slung over his knee like he owned the world, or at least the people in this room. He didn't look at her as he spoke, just lifted his phone, swiped it, then chuckled like something on screen mattered more than what she'd just said. "I was thinking," Lydia had offered moments earlier, her voice soft but certain, "of using a little of my savings to redo the kitchen. It's small, just new cabinets and better lighting maybe." Todd barked a laugh, sudden and sharp. "Don't waste money on yourself, Mom. You've little time left anyway." The words didn't land like a slap. They landed like an absence, like someone opened a door in her chest and pulled out the air. Michelle didn't flinch. She sat beside him, legs crossed, sipping her tea, pinky delicately raised like a proper suburban queen. Her eyes flicked briefly to Lydia's face, then away, as though acknowledging pain made her complicit in it. Lydia let a beat pass, steadying her breath. "You may be right," she said with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was even, not a tremble. She turned her gaze toward the fireplace, where a fake flame flickered quietly behind glass. "But I still like the idea of doing something that's mine." Todd didn't respond. He was already laughing at something else on his phone. At the far end of the room, Sophie had stilled. Her teenage posture slumped slightly, as if she'd felt the shift in the air. She looked at Lydia, not in pity, but something heavier. Recognition. A silent transmission that Lydia caught like static in her bones. The conversation turned to weather, then school schedules. Michelle asked Sophie if she'd signed up for SAT prep. Todd made a joke about how kids had it too easy now. No one looked at Lydia again. By the time the clock hit 5:47, the sun had dropped low enough to cast shadows long across the carpet. Lydia stood raw and smoothed her cardigan down over her hips. "Thank you for the tea," she said, to no one in particular. She kissed Sophie lightly on the crown of her head. The girl didn't smile, but she didn't pull away either. No one walked her to the door. She drove in silence. The road home was lined with dying trees, the kind the HOA wouldn't pay to replace. The leaves were brittle and clung to the branches like regrets, visible, useless, waiting to fall. At the red light on Maple and Ridgeview, Lydia's hand trembled slightly on the wheel. Not with rage, not with fear, with clarity. When she pulled into her driveway, she didn't shut off the car. The porch light clicked on, triggered by her headlights. That bulb had been flickering for weeks. She hadn't replaced it. She couldn't remember why. She sat there a moment longer, her purse in the passenger seat, the keys still in the ignition, the house ahead of her quiet, waiting. But she didn't move. The silence inside her was gone. Something else had taken its place. Not grief, not surrender. A sound began to rise from her chest, quiet at first, almost a cough, but it rolled into something deeper. She laughed, a real laugh, not loud, but free, airless and true, like it had waited 20 years to surface. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. Not yet, not tonight. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. The porch light blinked once, then died. The will sat on the kitchen table like a threat. Lydia didn't remember the exact day it arrived, only that Michelle had forwarded it with a chipper note in all lowercase. "Just for your records." The envelope had gone unopened for 3 days. Tonight she slid it open with a paring knife. Not reverent, but surgical. The overhead bulb buzzed. Her kitchen hadn't been redone in 23 years. Laminate counters, cabinets that stuck at the corners, drawer handles loose from decades of use. Todd's voice echoed, "Don't waste money on yourself." She laid the will flat, smoothing the crease with the side of her palm. His name was there, in bold. Todd James Whitaker, executor and sole beneficiary. No surprise, just confirmation. She stared at the line for a long time, then reached for a pen. A slow, deliberate underline carved his name in ink. Below it, in a steady hand, she wrote, "Doesn't see me, doesn't serve me." The sound of the pen on paper was surgical, final. She pushed the chair back, stood, and pulled a yellow legal pad from the junk drawer. She tore off the top page, covered in old grocery lists and half-finished crossword clues, and began again. Not theirs, mine. She wrote it at the top, then underlined it. Hard. The list came easily. Install new kitchen lighting, replace the porch bulb, change my will, reclaim power of attorney, paint the guest room. Something I like. Learn how to shut people out before they shut me down. The pen hovered. Then she added, "Call Peter Cho. Now." She knew Peter from her book club's estate. Planning night. Clean cut. Too young to be cynical, his card was still tucked behind her old library card, like a seed left just in case something ever bloomed. The phone rang twice before his assistant picked up. "Cho and Marin Associates, this is Tessa." "I need to speak to Peter Cho," Lydia said. Her voice was polite, precise, the kind of tone used by women who'd stopped asking for permission. "He's in with a client. I'll wait." A beat of silence. Then faint classical music hummed through the receiver. When Peter finally came on the line, his voice was warm but cautious. "Mrs. Whitaker?" "Not for long," she said. "I'd like to set up a meeting, preferably tomorrow. I have documents to revise." "Of course. Let me, pull up your file. I'm not in your system yet, but I will be." She didn't wait for a response. "Send me an appointment. First opening. I'll be there." Click. That night, Lydia sat in her recliner, notebook open on her lap. The TV was off, no music, no distractions, just the sound of her pen gliding across the page. She didn't write about them, Todd or Michelle or even Sophie. She wrote about herself, what she wanted, what she didn't, what she still had time for, what she'd never give again. The list grew. Not a bucket list, not a vengeance map, a reclamation. By 11:47 p.m., the house was still, save for the creak of old plumbing and the faint groan of October wind against the windows. She FaceTimed Winnie. Her oldest friend picked up from bed, still wearing lipstick. A half-empty glass of wine balanced on her chest. "You're calling late," Winnie said. "Someone dead?" "They're trying," Lydia said, with a dry laugh. Winnie narrowed her eyes. "What's he done now?" Lydia angled the phone toward the will, still spread open across her table. "He's priced my life like an appliance." Winnie blinked, then took a sip of wine. "Tell me he's not your executor." "He was," Lydia said. Then, as if flipping a switch, she looked directly into the camera. "Then he gets nothing when I unplug it." Winnie let out a slow, admiring exhale. "Oh, baby, there she is." In the other room, the printer whirred to life. The new documents were already queued. Peter had emailed the forms with a note, "Bring ID, and anything else you're done being quiet about." Lydia stood, gathered her notebook, and pulled the first page from the printer tray. Tomorrow she'd drive into town. But tonight she stayed up past midnight, writing the next chapter by hand, while the old version burned inside the shredder. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old carpet. Sunlight streamed through half-open blinds, slicing the table into bars of light and shadow. Lydia sat across from Peter Cho, her hands folded neatly over her notebook, eyes clear. She wore a navy blue sweater and small pearl studs, her armor for the day. Peter placed a fresh, legal pad between them and clicked his pen once. "So," he began carefully, "you said you'd like to make some changes." Lydia gave him a level nod. "Not changes, redefinitions." He smiled at that, tightly, like a man still unsure if he was about to walk into a minefield. "Fair enough." He opened a thick binder and turned a few pages. "Let's talk structure first. You're the sole owner of your assets." "Yes. My house, car, pension, savings." She tapped the table gently. "No debt, no co-signers." Great, that gives us options. Ever heard of an irrevocable trust? Lydia shook her head. He leaned in. It means once you set the terms, they're locked in. No one, not even you, can change them without a court order. It protects your assets from manipulation, challenges, or interference from bad actors. Her lips curled, slow. Bad actors, that's generous. Peter chuckled lightly, relieved she said it first. He continued, flipping a page. You can direct where the money goes now or later. We can include living transfers, funds dispersed while you're still alive, or posthumous clauses. It all depends on your goals. Lydia sat back. Her fingers moved to the charm on her necklace, a tiny silver owl Sophie had given her for Christmas years ago. I want to support girls who want to become scientists, or engineers, or surgeons. Anyone who needs more microscopes than makeup. You know? Peter paused, surprised. Her voice had shifted, not hard now, but lit with something warmer. I read about a local STEM program that mentors girls from public schools. They run summer labs. They need funding. Peter scribbled quickly. That's an incredible use. We can set up a designated clause, a fixed percentage annually, or a lump sum endowment. Do you want it in your name? Lydia hesitated. Then, no, I want it in Sophie's, quietly. He gave her a nod of respect. And what about family, he asked, cautious now. Her jaw tightened. Can I exclude someone entirely, she asked, legally, without leaving room for a fight? Peter folded his hands, thoughtful. Easily, especially with a fresh mental competency note from a doctor. That way, if anyone contests, it shows you made decisions knowingly, with full capacity. I'm not confused, Peter. I know you're not, but paperwork is persuasion. Lydia looked out the window at the rust-colored trees rustling beyond the glass. The sky was clear, autumn clean, no haze, no storms. I'll need to schedule that appointment, she said. I have a referral, Dr. Elaine McGuire. She specializes in elder legal assessments, completely impartial. Book it. He tapped a note into his tablet. Consider it done. Later that evening, Lydia returned home with 2 folders and a printed appointment slip. She set them carefully on the kitchen table beside a mug of chamomile tea. The air was cool but dry. Outside, the porch, light had finally gone out for good. She didn't replace it. She liked the way the darkness held her now. Winnie called as Lydia was going over the paperwork again. Her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Well, Winnie asked, did he try to talk you out of it? Peter? Lydia smiled faintly. No, he talked me into it. Into what? Lydia stared at the signature line on the trust draft. Into seeing how many choices I'd mistaken for obligations. Winnie whistled low. God, I wish I could bottle this version of you. You can, Lydia said, picking up the pen. Because I'm keeping it. She signed with deliberate strokes. Her name had never looked more final. Then she added something, just beneath the line, small, nearly invisible. A note to herself. He made me feel disposable. I'll make it permanent. She capped the pen, pressed the folder closed, and turned out the kitchen light. In the dark, the silence wasn't empty. It was earned. The cafe was tucked just off Main, wedged between a pottery co-op and a hardware store that hadn't changed its display window since Clinton was in office. Lydia liked it for its anonymity, quiet, low ceilings, no background music. Just steam, ceramic clinks, and the hush of small talk. Sophie was already there when Lydia arrived. She was at the corner table, hoodie sleeves rolled up, earbuds around her neck, sketchbook open but untouched. A half-drunk chai sat beside it. Lydia smiled at the sight, casual but deliberate. Sophie was always a little guarded, like she'd grown up decoding rooms before stepping into them. Lydia approached slowly, palms warm from the cup she carried. I didn't expect you early, Sophie shrugged. Didn't want to be home. Lydia nodded, slid into the seat across from her. The chair creaked under her as if voicing a protest of its own. They sat in a kind of easy silence for a few moments, 2 women separated by decades, but bound by something quieter than blood. Sophie looked up, eyes soft but serious. I don't know why they talk to you like you're already gone. Lydia didn't react immediately. She stirred her tea. 1, 2, 3 swirls, then set the spoon down gently. Because I stopped correcting them, she said. And people rarely question a silence that benefits them. Sophie blinked, nodded like she was filing that away for later. Outside, a gust of wind pulled at the hanging cafe sign, which swung slightly on its rusted chain. Inside, warmth gathered around them. Sophie flipped her sketchbook closed. I brought this for you, actually. She turned the book toward Lydia and slid it across the table. I started sketching portraits last month. Yours is on page 4. Lydia opened the book with care. The lines were soft but intentional. She recognized herself, but not from a mirror, from memory, from the inside. She looked up, something caught in her throat. You made me look awake. Sophie shrugged again, but her voice was quiet when she said, You are. They talked about art, not technique, intent. About the difference between being seen and being watched. About how survival isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's just staying. Lydia told her about the time she was 20 and rented a cabin in Colorado alone, just to see if she could be happy without anyone watching. Sophie told her about switching from AP Bio to AP Art behind her parents' backs. They laughed, really laughed. No one interrupted them, no one took up space, no one performed. I might help clean out the basement next week, Sophie said, sipping the last of her chai. If that's okay, Lydia blinked. You want to? Sophie looked down, fidgeting with the sleeve of her hoodie. I think I just want to see what you've kept. Lydia's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. So much of her had been stored away in that basement. Wedding albums, unfinished quilt kits, Todd's 5th grade report card still thumbtacked to a corkboard. Her silence, sealed in cardboard. I'd like that, she said quietly. Sophie gave a crooked smile, then stood. I've got to head to the studio. Midterm's kicking my ass. Lydia reached for the sketchbook but paused. May I keep this? Sophie nodded. Page 4 is yours. They hugged, brief but real. Then Sophie was gone, hoodie up, wind tugging at her hair as she disappeared down the block. Lydia stayed seated for a while after. The cafe was almost empty now. Her tea had gone cold. She opened the sketchbook again, just for a moment, stared at the lines that built her face. Not what Todd saw, not what Michelle ignored, but the version Sophie had captured. Someone still here, still sharp, still herself. She closed the book, tucked it into her bag, and looked out the window. Across the street, a for lease sign hung in a storefront that had once been a nail salon. The building was small, peeling paint, good light. And Lydia Whitaker, still seated, still holding something that mattered, smiled like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done building after all. Michelle's voice came through the phone in a tightrope whisper, carefully balanced, but with the threat of a fall underneath. So, you've been busy. Lydia stood at the sink, rinsing a single coffee mug. Her voice was steady. Everything I'm doing is within my rights. A silence, then the subtle clink of Michelle's bracelet through the receiver. Always some sound to fill what she couldn't say directly. This feels extreme. Lydia dried the mug with a striped dish towel, one corner worn nearly translucent. She folded it carefully. Not from where I'm sitting. Another pause. Then Michelle's voice again, clipped but still sugar-coated. You could have just talked to Todd. I tried that. For 20 years. The line went dead quiet. Lydia didn't call back. 3 days later, she sat again across from Peter Cho. This time, the legal folder wasn't a proposal. It was a declaration. All right, Peter said, flipping the cover open with a brisk nod. Everything's incorporated. The trust is fully restructured. Lydia nodded once. And the name? He slid a single-page document forward. Removed. Entirely. Todd's name was gone. Not redacted, not reallocated. Just gone. In its place was Sophie's. Not as a beneficiary of cash, but of meaning. Heirloom steward. A title Lydia had requested. Peter had raised an eyebrow at that, but she'd stood firm. It's not about what she gets, she'd said. It's about what she protects. Peter tapped the second page. And this is the clause you requested. STEM Foundation, $40,000. Funded immediately upon death and replenished annually via interest on retained assets. He looked up, impressed. That's a real investment, Lydia. Lydia glanced down at the wording she'd personally dictated. To fund the light in girls who were taught to dim it. She signed her name below it, smooth, certain. Peter leaned back. That's it. It's all real now. No, Lydia said. It's finally real. That night, Winnie came over with a bottle of Prosecco and 2 mini key lime tarts from Whole Foods. You realize, she said, settling into Lydia's couch, you're investing in the version of you he never respected. Lydia handed her a fork. Exactly. The house was quiet except for the sound of fizz and fork tines tapping porcelain. You don't feel a little, I don't know, vengeful? Winnie asked. Just a little. Lydia didn't answer immediately. She reached under the coffee table and pulled out Sophie's sketchbook, which now lived on the shelf with her favorite books, not hidden in a drawer, not stashed away like a memory she wasn't allowed to keep. She flipped to page 4. I'm not building this against anyone, Lydia said. She turned the sketch toward Winnie. The lines of her face stared back, awake, present, unapologetically alive. I'm building forward, not backward. Winnie studied the drawing, then let out a soft breath. God damn, Lydia leaned back, legs curled beneath her, tea cooling on the side table. The will had been signed, the money redirected, the weight redistributed. She wasn't waiting to be claimed anymore. She was choosing. Just as she stood to clear the mugs, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text. No name, just the number she hadn't saved. Todd. You went too far. We need to talk. This isn't over. Lydia stared at the message. Her thumb hovered for a long moment. Then she typed, Everything I've done is within my rights. She stared at the blinking cursor, then deleted the text entirely. No response, no reaction, just the quiet satisfaction of being unbothered. She turned her phone over, screen down, and walked away. The knock came on a Monday, late morning, too late for deliveries, too early for neighbors. Lydia had been in the kitchen, slicing pears. She heard it through the tile floor before she heard it with her ears. A heaviness in the wood, not tentative, familiar. She didn't move. The knife rested on the cutting board. A slow breath filled her lungs. Then she walked, unhurried, to the window. Todd. He stood on the porch, phone in one hand, the other jammed in the pocket of his pea coat. His shoulders were hunched like he wasn't sure whether to be mad or scared. His hair looked deliberately unkempt, an affectation of urgency. Lydia stood just inside the hallway, barely out of frame. She could see him clearly through the side pane. He couldn't see her. He knocked again, louder this time. Mom? The word hit the door like an accusation. You're not answering my texts, he said, voice raised but not shouting. Are you serious about this? Lydia didn't blink, didn't breathe. She watched as he shifted his weight, checked his phone, then knocked again. Not quite angry, not yet, but indignant. Can we just talk? You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, she thought. You made this easy the moment you laughed at me. She turned from the window, picked up her phone, and opened her messages. Her thumb moved without hesitation. To Peter Cho, client under stress. Unwanted contact. At home. She watched the message deliver, then tapped the knife back onto the cutting board. Behind her, Todd knocked once more. Then again, then silence. She waited a full 10 minutes before peeking through the window again. Gone. Peter responded 30 minutes later. Documenting it now. Time, details, everything. Stay firm. Call if he returns. We're in control. The words hit differently this time. Not reassurance, reinforcement. The next morning, Lydia stepped onto her porch with a small aluminum sign in one hand, a cordless drill in the other. It took her less than 5 minutes to mount it to the frame just above the bell. No soliciting, no exceptions. She stepped back, examined the angle, then nodded. The porch light, finally replaced, caught the edges of the sign, glinting like a warning. Inside, she poured herself coffee. Black. No sugar. By noon, she had typed and emailed one more note. To Michelle. Not attending Christmas this year. Please don't make it a discussion. My calendar's already full, with things that matter. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. That evening, the air inside the house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just hers. No footsteps she didn't want. No voice, pressing from the other side of the wall. No performance of civility. Just breath, and walls that stayed still. She walked into the guest room, the one she'd painted slate blue the week before. The bed was freshly made. Sophie's sketch sat framed on the dresser. Lydia ran her hand along the clean surface. She had made space, not in theory, not in metaphor, in actual physical terms. Later that night, a weather alert buzzed across her phone. A storm was expected by morning. Wind, sleet, the works. She stood at the window again, lights off, looking out. The porch was quiet. No one coming, no one staying. And Lydia Whitaker, surrounded by nothing but her choices, whispered to no one at all, "I'm not your shelter anymore." Christmas morning arrived the way she wanted it to, quiet. No doorbells, no ringing phones, no wrapping paper torn in rooms she didn't belong to. Just frost crawling across her kitchen window and the slow, steady hum of the furnace. Lydia padded across the tile in wool socks, coffee in hand, and stood by the counter where a small box waited. She'd wrapped it herself the night before in brown paper and twine, the kind she used to tie around cookie tins for neighbors. She untied the bow, unhurried. Inside, new hiking shoes, gray, sturdy, meant for uneven ground. A smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. "Merry Christmas, Lydia," she said softly, just to hear the sound of her own name said kindly. By 10, she'd layered a fleece under her parka and driven out toward the trailhead at Chautauqua Park. The sky was pale, thinly blue, the kind of winter morning that made sound carry. A few other cars dotted the lot, but the trail itself was near empty. She started slow. The air bit at her cheeks, sharp and clean. Each step crunched lightly against the snow-dusted dirt. She hummed, not a song exactly, more a tune remembered halfway. Something from before Todd's sarcasm had turned her quiet. Higher up the slope, she stopped to catch her breath. The town spread out beneath her, tiny rooftops capped in white. She could almost see her house from here. For once, the view didn't ache. It just existed, beautiful because she was in it, not despite her. She laughed softly to herself, a single sound that hung in the cold air before disappearing into the wind. Back home, she hung her coat over the radiator and slipped the new shoes off carefully, setting them side by side near the door. They were already dusted with mud, proof she'd gone somewhere that was hers. The living room was dim, lit only by the thin glow from the computer screen. She'd pulled the old family albums from the closet earlier, stacked them beside the scanner. Page after page, birthdays, graduations, Todd's first bike, her own forced smiles. The camera had always found her in the margins. She slid one photo into the scanner, herself at 29, holding baby Todd on a beach in Maine, her hair windblown, face unguarded. The tide behind. Her, relentless. The scanner light moved across the image with a soft electric sigh. She saved the file under one word, me, and then another. A shot of her alone in the garden, dirt under her fingernails. Still, me. She went on like that. No captions about family, no labels for years or events. Just her, reclaimed from every frame that had once belonged to someone else's story. When her phone buzzed, it wasn't Todd. Winnie. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Lydia smiled. Her fingers hovered, then typed back. "It feels clean." She hit send, then shut the phone off completely. The snow outside thickened as evening settled in. She poured a single glass of wine and stood by the window, watching flakes blur the world into something new. No tree, no gifts, no noise, only quiet. And inside that quiet, a pulse, a low hum that had nothing to do with loneliness and everything to do with peace. She raised her glass to the window, to her reflection looking back. "Here's to clean," she whispered. The office was small, efficient, and sunlit in a way that felt intentional. A vase of dried eucalyptus sat beside the receptionist's desk, and the air smelled faintly of ink and citrus. Lydia sat in the corner of the conference room, her coat folded neatly over the back of her chair, a leather-bound notebook resting on her lap. Across from her sat Heather Salgado, director of programs at the Wildflower Foundation, mid-30s, alert eyes, cardigan sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her laptop screen glowed between them, cursor blinking patiently over a draft proposal. "We're honored," Heather said, fingers poised above the keys. "Truly, a fund of this size, directed specifically at girls in STEM, can do more than just keep a lab stocked. It can reframe who sees themselves in the room." Lydia nodded slowly. She'd been thinking about that exact phrase for weeks now. Who sees themselves in the room? Not just who was allowed to enter, but who believed they belonged there. Heather continued. So the criteria will be female identifying students between 13 and 17, attending Title I schools in the state. Preference given to applicants interested in engineering, science, or applied mathematics. That's in line with what you asked for. Lydia smiled gently. Yes, I want them to see the door before it gets shut. Heather's fingers moved over the keyboard. And you've chosen a name for the fund? Lydia inhaled, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper. She slid it across the table. Heather read aloud. The Crane Rising Fund. She looked up, curious. Lydia met her gaze. Cranes are symbols of resilience, grace. They look fragile until they move, and then they're unstoppable. Quiet strength in flight. Heather blinked, visibly moved. That's beautiful. It's also quiet revenge, Lydia added, voice light but unmistakably firm. Heather smiled slowly, tapping the name into the form. We can have that name formalized by next week. One more thing, Lydia said, reaching for her notebook. I'd like my granddaughter, Sophie, to be included in the panel for future scholarship reviews. She's a minor, 17, but brilliant. I trust her eye more than most adults I've met. Heather nodded. We can draft language that adds her once she turns 18, then include her permanently. Good. Lydia glanced toward the window, where a single bird cut across the sky, winging sharp and fast toward the horizon. Heather closed the laptop gently and leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know, she said, you're not just writing checks here, you're writing access. Lydia sat back in her chair. Exactly. Not applause, not recognition, just direction. On her drive home, the roads were damp with leftover snowmelt. Lydia kept the heat low and the windows cracked. Enough for the cold to keep her alert, to make her remember that she was here, in motion, moving toward something. She passed the turn to Todd's neighborhood without glancing down it. No weight, no reflex. Her mind stayed on the foundation. On girls in classrooms she would never enter. On Sophie, sketching in corners, slowly learning that legacy didn't have to be inherited. It could be built. That night, Lydia pulled out the printout Peter had sent her, the finalized trust packet, page after page of declarations. In the margin beside the Crane Rising clause, she added one line in ink. Let this be the door they didn't expect, but can no longer close. She tucked the page back into the folder, sealed it, and slipped it into her filing cabinet under a new label. Future Active. The email came on a Tuesday morning, crisp and professional. Subject line: Petition to review estate actions. Sender: Peter Cho. Lydia read the first line aloud as she poured her coffee. They filed. We're ready. She didn't flinch, just set the mug down and sat by the window, the one that looked out toward her garden's frostbitten edge. In Peter's office, the response packet was already collated into sections, tabbed in pale yellow and navy blue. Standard scare tactic, he said, flipping through. Todd's claiming diminished capacity, undue influence, emotional distress, the whole kitchen sink. Lydia raised a single eyebrow. From what? A revised will I signed in full daylight with 3 witnesses and better posture than most attorneys? Peter chuckled under his breath. We're not worried, but we're not assuming either. He turned his laptop toward her. On screen, a list of materials scrolled. Letter of Cognitive Competency from Dr. Elaine McGuire. Signed and notarized statement of intent dated video interview of Lydia discussing her legacy choices. Digital timestamp log of every change since October. This is airtight, he said, eyes steady. Your documentation would make a Supreme Court clerk weep with joy. Lydia leaned back in the chair, hands folded. Then let's give them nothing to hold. The hearing took place over Zoom. Lydia didn't attend. She didn't need to. Peter messaged her mid-morning with one sentence. Dismissed in 15 minutes. She stared at her phone, read it again, then a third time. 15 minutes. Later, he called. Judge was unimpressed, he said, a trace of satisfaction in his voice. Said the petition was poorly formed, poorly evidenced, and this is a direct quote, an insult to competent women everywhere. Lydia smiled. A real one. the kind that didn't just curve her mouth, but lifted something behind her eyes. "Anything else?" she asked. "Yeah." Todd was reprimanded. The court clerk flagged his filing as frivolous. Any further action without new evidence, sanctionable. "Let him try again," she said coolly. "The paper trail's already set." That afternoon, she opened her estate binder and slid the stamped dismissal behind the trust final tab. For a second, her hand lingered on the divider. She thought of all the years she'd filled paperwork that wasn't for her. School forms, tax returns, leases she didn't sign but still paid. Now the documents bore her name, her language, her future. She closed the binder with a soft click. Final, not finished. When Sophie came over that evening, hoodie, boots, the smell of charcoal and studio paint trailing her, Lydia was in the kitchen, slicing apples for a crumble. Sophie flopped onto a bar stool and watched her work. "Peter told me what happened. I figured he would." "They really thought they owned your ending." Lydia looked up. Not with bitterness, not even pride, just clean recognition. They were wrong. She dropped the apple slices into the bowl, each one landing with the faintest thud. Then she reached for the cinnamon. Outside, the wind was picking up. The first few flakes of a fresh storm whispered against the window glass. Inside, Lydia Whitaker moved calmly, decisively, like someone who had nothing to prove and everything still to protect. The next message from Todd was short. No greeting, no punctuation. "This is cruel." Lydia stared at it on her screen, the gray iMessage bubble pulsing like a breath held too long. Her thumb hovered for a beat, then, with one small tap, delete. No draft, no response, no proof left behind. The silence that followed didn't feel like power. It felt like peace. The next morning, she signed up for a pottery class at the local art center. Tuesday nights, 2 hours, open, studio access. The receptionist had looked surprised when she handed over her card. "First time wheel?" Lydia smiled. First time choosing something messy on purpose. She didn't sculpt well, at least not at first. Her first piece collapsed into a lopsided bowl that looked more like a rejected ashtray. Her second, a vase with a mouth too wide to hold anything but apology. By the third session, she had stopped trying to impress the clay. That night, hands dusted with slip and grit beneath her fingernails, she shaped a small rectangular plaque, no larger than a postcard. The edges were rough, the letters took work, but when she wiped away the excess, there it was. "No one spends me twice." She held it up, clay still damp, and let the phrase settle into the room like a truth that didn't need to be explained. At Peter's office, the final trust filings waited in a neat blue folder, paper-clipped and time-stamped. "It's done," he said simply. Lydia flipped through the last few pages, nodding at each line as if reading sheet music she'd composed herself. "Locked?" she asked. "Completely, fund endowed. Everything you outlined in place." She slid a typed note across the desk. Peter unfolded it, a request for quarterly reports on the Crane Rising Fund. "To Sophie only?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "She's the future," Lydia said, "and the only one who's earned my details." Peter smiled, tucked the note into his file. "She'll be ready." "She already is." The next stop was the town library. Lydia had boxed up her old design books, fabric swatch guides, textile theory, vintage architecture monographs, things she'd used when she was the woman who made a house feel like it had a soul. The woman no one thought twice about asking for a quick favor, with curtains or holiday table layouts. She donated all of it, 3 boxes, precisely labeled. "Sure you don't want to keep any?" the librarian asked kindly. Lydia shook her head. "They got what they needed from me. It's time someone else gets something from them." As she turned to leave, a girl no older than 14 watched her from the nonfiction aisle, eyeing the newly carded books like treasure. Lydia paused just long enough to catch the girl's eye, gave her a small nod. The girl smiled back. That evening, Lydia walked the house slowly, not like she was checking it, like she was blessing it. Each room felt more like her, less like history. In the corner of the guest room, the plaque she'd sculpted now rested on the dresser beneath Sophie's framed sketch. "No one spends me twice." It wasn't defiant. It was decided. Outside, the first spring wind carried early petals down the street, soft, certain, unbothered. Inside, Lydia closed the final filing drawer and whispered, as if the house might understand. I never needed to prove a damn thing. The voicemail arrived just after sunrise. Time-stamped 6:08 a.m. from an unknown number. Lydia didn't need to guess at. She stared at the notification on her phone as she folded the last of the clean towels. Steam from the laundry vent curling against the windows. One new voicemail, no transcript. Just a silent wedge waiting to be opened. She set the phone on the counter, made tea, swept the floor, lit a candle in the hallway. The notification stayed. Quiet. Persistent. By noon, she picked up the phone. Her thumb hovered over play, then slid down instead, tapped delete, and held it just long enough for the confirmation to appear. Delete this message. Not mine to carry, she whispered it as her finger tapped, yes. The message vanished. No echo, no trace. That night, Lydia pulled a fresh leather-bound journal from her dresser, one she'd bought 5 years ago but never cracked open. The spine still stiff, pages still unsullied by grief or obligation. She wrote the date in the top right corner, paused, and then, "This is not a beginning, it's a continuation, without permission." The pen felt good in her hand. She hadn't journaled in over a decade, not since Todd's first real betrayal, when she'd stopped trusting even her own thoughts to stay private. But now, no one was reading her, no one was revising her. She wrote for 20 straight minutes, not about him, not about the past, just her body, her breath, her kitchen and her tea, and the way her mind felt less cluttered now that the voices of everyone else had finally gone still. The next day she painted the office. Not beige, not eggshell, not anything that made the room feel like a neutral compromise. A warm, soft amber like sun on birchwood, light enough to feel open, deep enough to feel intentional. She took down the old prints, blueprints of homes she'd staged in another life, and replaced them with one framed poster. Minimalist. Matte black frame. The text in off-white serif read, "Silence is not absence." She hung it just above the desk. The new desk, hers, no unpaid bills, no grocery lists for other people. Just a lamp, a blank pad, and the echo of her own space. Sophie came by late that afternoon. No announcement. Just the soft knock Lydia knew was hers. She brought almond tea and 2 lemon bars, both wrapped in wax paper. "Kitchen or porch?" Lydia asked. "Porch," Sophie said, already unlacing her boots. They sat under the overhang, legs tucked, steam rising from their mugs. The wind carried the smell of fresh mulch and something blooming just beneath the surface. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was layered, inhabited, understood. At one point, Lydia reached over and tapped Sophie's hand lightly, not with urgency, just presence. Sophie looked up and smiled. "Good day?" Lydia nodded. "Clean one." Sophie leaned back again. "Those are my favorite kind." Inside, Lydia's journal remained open on the desk, ink still drying beside her first entry. Above it, the framed print caught the last blush of sun before evening settled in. "Silence is not absence." It ran in the Boulder Daily on a Wednesday, page 3, lower half, sandwiched between a write-up about a new hiking trail grant and a community arts calendar. New local fund empowers girls in STEM. Underneath, a photo of Heather Salgado standing beside a tall easel with a crimson silk cloth pulled halfway down. Behind it, bold serif lettering, the Crane Rising Fund. No ribbon cutting, no handshakes, no ceremonial check. Just clean words, a clear mission. The final paragraph read, "Founded anonymously in partnership with the Wildflower Foundation. The endowment was established by Lydia Whitaker of North Boulder, a former designer and longtime supporter of educational access." Lydia read it once, then again, then folded the paper into thirds and slid it into a drawer next to her electric bill. She didn't clip it, she didn't frame it. That had never been the point. 2 days later, the first email arrived through the Foundation's public inbox. Subject: a thank you that's overdue. "You won't remember me, but in 1998 you spoke to our high school about interior design. I was the only girl of color in the room. You told me I didn't have to be loud to take up space. I've been a project manager at NASA since 2017. Thank you." Then another, and another. One from a former art student, another from a woman who'd never met her but whose niece had just received a Crane Rising application packet in the mail. Some emails were long, others just one line. "You gave me my start." Lydia read each one slowly, then printed them on thick white paper. She filed them in a manila folder, hand-labeling it with a Sharpie. Real returns. Later that night, she wept. Once, quietly, in the space between tea and sleep. She didn't cry for approval. She cried for recognition, the kind no courtroom or kitchen table had ever given her. The spring brunch was held in a converted greenhouse, strung with hanging plants and glass terrariums. Soft jazz drifted from a three-piece combo in the corner. White linen napkins. No family table. Lydia hadn't invited anyone. She wore navy, no jewelry, her gray hair pulled back in a clean knot. She moved through the room like a tide, silent, steady, unmistakably present. Heather introduced her without flair. "This is Lydia Whitaker, the woman who reminded us that visibility and vanity are not the same thing." The room applauded. Lydia nodded once, then returned to her table. A girl named Darshani, one of the first Crane Rising applicants, sat beside her. Bright eyes, blue notebook in her lap. "You made this real," she whispered. Lydia smiled. "You'll make it matter." Afterward, as the guests thinned and coffee cooled in porcelain cups, Sophie found her grandmother near the window wall, watching the sun hit the vine-covered beams. "You did all of this," Sophie said softly, "without making it about you." Lydia looked at her, not wistfully, not proudly, just clearly. "It was never about me. That's why it worked." Sophie tucked her arm through Lydia's. "Your story didn't end. It rerouted." Lydia let out a quiet exhale. "So did I." Outside, a breeze lifted through the open doors, sweeping spring air into the greenhouse like a gentle announcement. Lydia paused, just before exiting, to turn back one last time, not toward applause or plaques or headlines, but toward something else, momentum. The email was dressed in politeness. Subject: follow-up request, family asset review. From Martin Platt, CPA/CC, Todd Whitaker. Attachment: a spreadsheet Lydia didn't open. The tone was careful, almost apologetic. Phrases like reconciliatory insight, clarifying our mutual understanding, and cooperative planning. But Lydia had read enough contracts in her life to know what those words really meant. A door half cracked, waiting for someone to barge in. She closed the laptop, didn't respond, walked out into the garden instead, where the soil still held the weight of winter, but the tips of crocuses were starting to break through. Small things, quiet things, still fighting for light. When she returned, she forwarded the email to Peter Cho with one line: "I do not consent to any meeting, present or future." Peter called her within the hour. "You saw the CC?" "I did." He exhaled. The line between his words was always tighter when he was angry. "He's trying to create a paper trail of ambiguity, one that looks cooperative if reviewed by a judge. He'll find the trail ends here." Peter's voice sharpened. "I've already sent a cease and desist. Direct contact, financial inquiries, or third-party proxies. It's all covered now. If he or his accountant tries anything else, we move to protective orders." Lydia was seated at her desk, soft light falling across the amber walls. She was calm, beyond anger, past offense. She felt surgical. "Do you still want the personal letter on file?" Peter asked. "I'm writing it now," she said. "Give me until the end of the hour." She opened a fresh document and began typing. Slowly, deliberately. "I leave no room for return. I am not confused. I am not under influence. I am not sentimental enough to open a door I've already walked out of. I made every decision about my estate, my future, and my peace with clarity, with competence, with documentation. This is not punishment. This is preservation. This is not revenge. This is reclamation. Lydia Whitaker." She printed it on textured cardstock, signed it in dark blue ink, folded it and tucked it into the same folder as the Crane Rising Fund letters and the court dismissal. She labeled it Final Walls. 3 days later, Sophie appeared at Lydia's door, holding an envelope so crisp it looked like it had been pressed flat between the pages of a textbook. Lydia let her in without a word. They moved to the kitchen, tea already steeping. Sophie didn't sit. She handed Lydia the envelope like it was a shared heartbeat. I heard this morning. Full ride. Lydia opened the envelope carefully, her fingers steady. A full scholarship, tuition, housing, books. University of Washington, Department of Mechanical Engineering, early admission, honors track, funding through all 4 years. She read the letter once, twice. Sophie stood frozen, unsure whether to speak. Lydia set the letter down, looked up. You built this. Not for them, not for me. Just for you. Sophie blinked fast, her throat working around unshed words. Lydia reached into the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a sky-blue envelope she'd sealed over a month ago. I thought this might be for spring break. Or maybe a summer research trip. Or just your first bookstore binge. Either way, she smiled. It's not tuition, it's breath. Sophie took the envelope. You planned this before I got in. I planned it the day I took your name off the margins and wrote it into the future. Sophie laughed through a tear. Jesus, Grandma. I know. The photo came later that day. Peter had filed the final notice at the county courthouse, estate trust completed, all objections dismissed, no pending actions. It was the last time Lydia would be tied to that building. She and Sophie stood together on the wide stone steps, sun warming the side of Lydia's face as she squinted into the lens. No courthouse drama, Sophie teased. Just paperwork, the good kind. Sophie raised her phone. Smile? Lydia didn't, but she stood tall, unshaken. A woman with nothing to reclaim because nothing had been taken. Click. The picture captured them both. Shoulders aligned. The courthouse behind them not as battleground, but as backdrop. Not history, just what was left behind. That evening, Lydia returned home and sat at her desk, the silence of the house humming with meaning. She reached for her journal, wrote just one line. I chose peace, and I defended it like a fortress. She closed the book, pushed back her chair, walked to the guest room. There, on the dresser beside Sophie's sketch, was the plaque she'd sculpted weeks ago. No one spends me twice. She touched its edge. Then her fingers moved to the folder labeled Final Walls. She placed it on top of the dresser. A visible boundary, a closing act, but not an ending. The envelope came with no return address. Just a single forever stamp in the corner and Lydia's name in the center, written in handwriting that leaned slightly right, urgent and careful, like someone afraid of being misunderstood. She opened it at her desk, a slice of morning sun cutting across the paper like a spotlight. Inside was a card, simple, no glitter, no embossed gold, just a hand-drawn crane in flight and 4 lines in blue ink. Your name was the first one I Googled. I didn't know women like you existed. I want to be like you. Thank you for showing me how. No signature, no need. Lydia sat still for a long time, the card resting in her lap, warm from her hands. It wasn't validation. She felt it was echo. She was no longer the only voice in the room. She opened her journal, turned to a fresh page beneath the last line she'd written. I chose peace, and I defended it like a fortress. Below that, in deliberate print, she wrote, Legacy activated. April 17th, 9:04 a.m. She slipped the card inside the journal, pressed the cover closed, and placed it on her desk like an offering. That evening was her pottery showcase. The last class of the season, hosted inside a reclaimed barn, with a row of floodlights strung from rafters and folding tables draped in linen. Each student had 2 pieces on display, one from the first week, one from the last. Lydia's first piece still looked like something excavated from a beginner's anxiety. A warped clay bowl that leaned to one side like it had witnessed too much. Her last piece was smaller, precise. A vase, not too proud, not too polished, glazed in deep green. Her fingers still visible in its slight imperfections. She stood by it for a while, letting people move around her. A few commented, soft praise, nods of appreciation. No one asked if she was a mother, a wife, a grandmother, just a maker. She hadn't invited family. She hadn't needed to. Her name stood alone on the card beneath the vase, Lydia Whitaker, untitled. She smiled at that. There was freedom in not naming things too early. 2 weeks later, Sophie sent a photo. She'd moved into the dorm early for a summer bridge program. The room was still half unpacked. Sheets in a pile, textbooks stacked on the desk like fortresses in waiting. But there, hanging above her bed, was Lydia's final vase. Sophie had mounted a narrow wall shelf and placed it in the center, lit by a tiny clip-on lamp. Below it, taped to the wall, was Lydia's phrase written in Sophie's handwriting. "No one spends me twice." Lydia stared at the photo, fingers resting lightly against the phone screen, not to trace it, just to feel the moment hold. She didn't text back right away, just sat with the knowledge that her granddaughter had not only understood, but absorbed. That night, Lydia poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, the summer air thick with honeysuckle and a distant hum of cicadas. Winnie had once asked her if love still mattered after the war was over. She hadn't known how to answer then, but now, watching the slow spin of a wind chime that no longer clanged for chaos, she found the words. She whispered them aloud, just once. "I used to think love had to last to count. Now I know, direction matters more." She looked up at the sky, cloudless, deep blue, no movement, but she felt something shift anyway. Inside, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. No voicemail this time, just a hang-up. She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The binder lay open on the desk, its pages weighty with permanence. Cream tabs divided each section: trust, fund, foundation, letters, legal confirmations. Each page signed, sealed, time-stamped. Lydia flipped to the final divider. Status, distributed. No claims pending. She clicked the pen once, then printed her name at the bottom of the closing sheet. Not just a signature, a period. No one had the right to revisit this story. Not Todd. Not Michelle. Not any man in a suit asking for a brief review. It was done. The chair arrived a week later, sleek, mid-century modern, wrapped in deep rust velvet with tapered walnut legs. She'd spotted it 3 months ago in the corner of a boutique downtown. Had run her hand across the armrest, but walked away, unsure. Now she had no doubts. It sat angled toward the wide front window, where the light fell softly across her lap each morning. She'd tucked a woven blanket over the side, not for show, but for comfort. No one else sat there. No one else was invited to. She sipped her coffee slower these days. No need to rush through the morning to keep someone else's timeline. She read. She listened to jazz. She watched the neighborhood dog walkers go by, without wondering if they pitied her for living alone. She didn't feel alone. She felt precise. Sophie came home from school midweek, unannounced, which Lydia had learned was always a good sign. She brought flowers, freesia and snapdragons. No card. "I saw them and thought of you," she said. Setting the bouquet down on the kitchen counter, Lydia smiled. Because they're bold and slightly strange, because they're upright and hard to miss. They sat in the living room, Sophie cross-legged on the rug, Lydia in her new chair, cup of tea balanced on the arm. Sophie gestured at the binder, still open on the desk. "Final update?" Lydia nodded. Every cent placed, every door closed. Sophie hesitated. "Do you feel guilty?" Lydia set the tea down, met her granddaughter's gaze evenly. "I'm not proud of cutting him out," she said. "I'm proud I stopped giving him more chances to cut me." Sophie didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Good." Then they sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind that knows how to hold people. Outside, a car passed slowly, bass thumping, windows open. It didn't break the moment, just reminded them both that time kept moving, and Lydia had no interest in chasing it anymore. That afternoon, she walked to the mailbox and found it empty. No more manila envelopes, no more certified threats, no vague birthday cards wrapped in guilt. Just space. She opened the lid, closed it, smiled. That night, she updated the final page of her journal. The ink soaked in clean. She didn't write a paragraph, just a single line. My son laughed. "Don't waste money on yourself. You've little time left." So I wasted none erasing him from my will, and spent every cent on proof that I still mattered. She folded the journal closed, stood, and moved through the house slowly. Room by room, she turned off each light, not as ritual, but as recognition. Every choice she had made, every boundary held, every dollar redirected, every silence preserved, had formed this piece. She hadn't just reclaimed her life, She had curated her ending, on her own terms, with her own hands, without apology. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing through the trees like a breath over glass. Lydia sat back down in her new chair, pulled the blanket over her lap, and looked out the window. No sirens, no letters, no footsteps. Just the world, unbothered, because she had made it that way.